Members, I want you to think about where you might be in 10 years. The year is 2031. Our lives have changed, and most of us would have moved on from our service in the Florida House, but we'll have enough perspective to better understand the significance of our work here as public servants. We may look at old Florida Channel videos of today's remarks and be taken aback by what we see. We'll see members rise in debate while wearing masks and be astonished with the reminder of what it was like to live through a once-in-a-lifetime pandemic. We'll be reminded of the closure of businesses, crippling job losses, the sickness, and the devastating human loss of life in Florida and around the world. We'll remember how Florida's youth struggled during the pandemic, from isolation, from mental health struggles, academic setbacks, whose consequences lasted for many years afterwards. And so when we look back on today's debate, we might also be quite astonished by the fact that a priority of the Florida House of Representatives during this moment in time was to expel and prohibit transgender children from participating in athletic programs as people were still dying from COVID en masse. We will be astonished not just that this legislation was prioritized, but about how overtly anti-transgender this bill really is. The reason I mention this in a historical context is because a colleague, a proponent actually of the bill, shared with me something that really stuck. They shared that they thought transgender rights were about 10 or 15 years behind the gay, lesbian, and bisexual rights movement. And they said that soon the trans community will find the same type of broad support now enjoyed by gays, lesbians, and bisexual people. That observation to me was a reminder that civil rights movements have taught us so many important lessons on the importance of acceptance and equality for all. So I ask the members of the Florida House, what have you learned from similar civil rights movements that brought us to the place that we are now? Individual rights are not unlimited. They require balance with the rights of others. But this bill is anything but balanced. People keep bringing up the Olympics. The Olympics has not banned transgender women athletes. This bill does. But this is not the Olympics. These are children. Members. This bill is a straight-up prohibition on transgender girls participating in girls' sports. No balance. It upends and cancels the well-established policies of the FHSAA and the NCAA that the sponsors have acknowledged have created zero problems for us since they were implemented in 2013. Yes, since 2013, trans kids have been playing. They've been playing. There's been no problems. The policies set forward by NCAA and FHSAA, they determine the eligibility of trans athletes based on well-established and rigorous standards. Standards that are now completely wiped out by this bill, canceled, replaced with a blanket ban excluding transgender girls entirely. Proponents keep saying it's not a ban. They say trans girls, who by the way are girls, they look like girls, They live their lives as girls. They use girls' restrooms. You keep referring to them as biological men, which is misgendering their true identities. They are girls. But proponents say trans girls aren't banned. They can play on the boys' team. Members, I've heard this before. Years ago, proponents of a constitutional amendment banning gay marriage told me, a gay man, I wasn't banned from the institution of marriage. I can follow science, I can follow nature, and I can marry a woman. Laughable now. Members, years ago, people said it. Some still do. And I heard this argument in previous sessions when a disgraced former member of the House said in support of a bill banning trans women from using women's restrooms, well, they can use the men's room. Members, this argument that trans girls can simply play on boys' teams is just as absurd, even if some of you don't quite see it yet. As discussed during yesterday's amendments and debate, or lack thereof, by members in the majority party, no defense was offered for the indefensible consequences of this bill. Amendments to exempt elementary school babies rejected, no explanation offered. Amendments to remove invasive genital inspections of kids whose gender is disputed, rejected, no explanation provided. Amendments to grandfather in trans kids who are currently playing in team sports to do no harm, at least to them, rejected, no explanation provided. Members, I understand why there was no explanation provided, because there's no defense for the indefensible consequences of this bill. Deafening silence. Members, you don't have to do this, but I'm not going to lose any more sleep on trying to win over GOP colleagues who may privately oppose the bill but vote yes anyway. The real victims here aren't those of you who will be held accountable for voting for the most anti-LGBTQ legislation passed in the Florida House in 23 years. The real victims are our most vulnerable kids, caught in the crossfire, the trans kids who will be expelled from teams they are currently playing on effective July 1st. It's the 8-year-old who has a soccer ball taken from her with all of her teammates, along from all of her teammates taken away, the 5th grader who can watch her friends, but after this school year can no longer join them on the court. Members, my message for you is vote your conscience, not your party. But regardless of whether or not this bill is signed into law, I also, again, have a message for transgender youth in Florida and everywhere. You are loved. You are beautiful. You are perfect, just the way you are. Please vote down on this bill. Thank you, members.